Okay, so we are working on our day 2 notes. It's our little flip book here. So these are your pages solving. You should see graphing, then factoring. That's it, 3 pages for this one. So there's this little line right here. You're going to want to cut that. So. There we go. Get rid of those papers. So I'm going to flip this. You'll see the square root side. So like we did before with our flip book, we're going to fold it down. You want to try to get along that little dotted edge right inside there. And so then we got the next one in there. And then our last one. So we end up with our little flip book here of reviewing of how to solve quadratics. So when we're done, you can put like little staples up here to keep all the papers together. And then you can glue this into your notebook. This is our day 2 notes. So reviewing first graphing, that was the first method of solving that you've done. You can graph your quadratic in order to solve. So here's our first one, x squared minus 4x minus 5. Easiest thing to do. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more here for you so you can see it better. So go into your calculator, go to your y equals, and type in your equation. So x squared minus 4x minus 5. Then we want to go to our table, and remember you want to find your pattern. And your pattern is where your numbers start to repeat in your y column. And you want to go in the middle. So our middle is 2, -9. And then we go 3 numbers up, 3 numbers down. So that's -8, -5, and 0, -8, -5, and 0. So then you would plot your points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 8, 5, and 0. And there's our quadratic. Remember, we always go for the middle of it so you can see that repeating pattern so you can get your U-shaped graph here. And the whole point of solving by graphing is you're trying to figure out what your roots are. That's what you're solving for. So in this case, x equals -1 and x equals 5. That would be our solution to our graph. And then keep in mind you've got all your other aspects of your graph that you went through for the day 1 stuff. So our next one, we will try, type in our equation. And then you want to get your table. All right, so you want to find the middle of your table. So it's right about in here. Now for this one, I don't really want to plot these fractions here. So I'm going to go to where my x is a 0, and I'm going to hit +2. And so what that does when I hit the +2 is it gets rid of all of those fractions for me. And now I can find my middle very easily. So that's going to be 4, -2, then 2, 0, -2, and then 6, 8, 10. We got 0, 6, 16. 0, 6, 16. 1, 2, 3, 4. Go down 2. This will be at 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So again, our solution is where we hit the x-axis. So this would be x equals 2 and x equals 6 for that one. So that's our graphing. Getting your table of values, you always want this pattern here in the y-axis. That's how you know you've done it correctly. So next one, we've actually done this one a little bit with our rational functions that we were dealing with in Unit 1. Solving your quadratics by factoring. That was another method that you learned in order to solve quadratics. So for this one, multiplies to 30 adds to 11 would be 6 and 5. They would both be negative because this was negative, and then negative times negative is positive, and then you set them equal to 0, and we get x equals 6, x equals 5. Next one, multiplies to negative 14 adds to negative 5 would be x minus 7, and then x plus 2. Set them equal to 0, and we get 7 and negative 2. So you factor your trinomial, and then you set them equal to 0. And then 5, that one's a little bit harder for trinomial. 3x squared, that's going to be 3x and x. For 6, we have a lot of options. I'm kind of leaning towards 3 and 2. So I put 3 here. When I multiply, that would give me a 9x. So that means my 2 would go here, because then 3 times 2 gives me 6. And then again, you set them both equal to 0. So we would get negative 2/3 and negative 3. And then our last one under factoring here, again, a little bit harder of a trinomial. So 5x and x is going to give me my 5x squared. 8, we got 1 and 8, 2 and 4, or yeah, 2 and 4. If I put my 2 here, that's going to make this a 10. And then minus 4, there's our negative 14. So we get 2 and then 4/5 as our answer. So that's our solving by factoring. So you factor them, set them equal to 0, and then you end up with your answers. Another one, which quite a few of you I had noticed before were using with our rationals, solving by using square roots. So if you have simply an x squared equals a number, you can take the square root of both sides, but you have to remember the plus or minus. This is where our plus or minus comes back because you're introducing that square root sign. So for this one, it's not just 9, it's going to be plus or minus 9. For number 8, we want to divide by 6 first. So that gives us a 64. X squared equals 64. And so now we'll take the square root. And we get plus or minus 8. So taking the square root method, it just means you take the square root of both sides. But you always have to get that x squared by itself. So like for number 9 here, I'm going to add my 7 first. And that's going to give me a 32. Divide by that negative 2, and I get a negative 16. And now, because of last unit, we can actually find answers to these questions. And this would end up being plus or minus 4i. Remember, whenever you have that negative underneath that square root sign, it's going to end up being an I. 10, a little bit more challenging, but still follows the same methods that we were just using. So here I would divide by 4 first to get my squared thing by itself. So this would give me a 30. I just had my blank. 38. Let's check. 144 divided by 4, 36. See, that's why we check. I had a brain fart. So now our squared thing, I call it a thing because there's a binomial in there. Our squared binomial, we still take the square root of it. Then over here we get plus or minus 6. And then we add our 3 over. And we have to finish it and get the 2 answers. So 3 plus 6, 9. 3 minus 6, negative 3. There's our 2 answers. A lot faster than actually multiplying everything out and then trying to factor. So same thing with number 11 here. So we'll add our 9 over first. That's going to give me a negative 75. I'm doubting myself now because I struggled with the 144 divided by 4. So divide by 3, and we got negative 25. So we're going to have an I in our answer again. So x plus 1, I don't need to write that in parentheses, equals plus or minus 5i. 25 is a perfect square, but because it's negative, it becomes I. And then I subtract my 1 over, and I get negative 1 plus or minus 5i. Same process, but our i's are going to start showing up a lot more for these ones. So that's our square root method. Next one of my personal favorites, is our completing the square. So 12. Remember, completing the square. X is on one side with a space. Your constant, which is your number, on the other side with a space. So you're going to take this number, divide it in half, so that'd be 3, and then square it. So we end up with a 9, and that's what goes in our spaces. So again, it was this divided by 2, and then squared. So if I were to factor this out, it would give me x plus 3 times x plus 3, which would simplify up into x plus 3 squared. And then 16 plus 9 gives me 25. So just like we were doing on the last page, take that square root, plus minus 5, subtract your 3 over, and we get negative 3 plus or minus 5. So negative 3 plus 5 gives me 2. Negative 3 minus 5 gives me a negative 8. All right, next one. X's are already on one side. So I put my spaces in there. Half of 10 is negative 5. Square it, you get positive 25, which is why I always put plus a space. It always turns into positive when you square it. So this time this would factor into x minus 5 squared, and then negative 28 plus 25 is negative 3. Take the square root, gives me plus or minus I radical 3. 3 is not a perfect square, so that's going to stay underneath there. And then add your 5 over. So 5 plus or minus I radical 3 is our final answer for that one. All right. Going to 14. We can't do completing the square with that being a 2. We can't have 2x squared. So we divide everything by 2. And I'm going to move my 10 over, which actually it's a negative 5, because 10 divided by 2 is 5, and then I'm going to subtract it over to here. And then I put my spaces in there. So again, half of 6 squared would be 9. This is x plus 3 squared equals 4. Square root, plus or minus 2, and then subtract your 3. We can actually combine those numbers, so we have to. Negative 3 plus 2 is negative 1. Negative 3 minus 2, negative 5. Negative 1 and negative 5. And then our last one here, again, I have to divide by 4. So I can't do 4x squared. But it doesn't divide evenly for your negative 34. Only that is negative 8.5. Actually, scratch that. I'm going to make that negative 17 over 2. Just because I'm noticing my 3 here, when I divide that in half, that's going to give me 3 halves. And then 3 halves squared would be 9/4. So I got fractions. So when I factor my left side, that's going to be x plus 3 halves squared. Whatever half of this is, that's what goes here. That's why I know it's 3 halves so quickly. And then adding over on the other side, negative 17 halves plus 9/4 is negative 25/4. I used my calculator to help me with that one. Please feel free to do that as well. Taking the square root, these are both perfect squared, although this one's negative, so we're going to have an I, so it's going to be plus or minus 5I over 2. Square root of 25 is 5, square root of 4 is 2. So that gives me negative 3/2 plus or minus 5I radical 2 for that one. So our I's are going to be showing up. And then our last way that we could solve our quadratics is our quadratic formula. X equals negative b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. There's our quadratic formula. I know you definitely did this in Algebra 1. Pretty sure you reviewed this in geometry as well, but there's our quadratic formula. That one is given to you on the reference sheet, so you don't have to memorize it, but you need to know how to use it. A is in front of your squared term, B is in front of your x term, and C is your constant, your number that's just there. This only works if it's a squared term, second degree as we call it. It doesn't work on the fourth roots, third roots, any of those. It's got to be squared. So for 16, our A is a 1, our B is a 5, and our C is a 14. So we're going to plug and chug into our equation, as I like to say. So it'll be negative 5 plus or minus I squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 14. All over 2 times 1. So let's figure out what we've got underneath that radical. So 5 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 14 gives me 81. Square root of 81 is a 9. So, negative 5 plus 9 is 4. Divided by 2 gives me 2. Negative 5 minus 9 is negative 14. Divided by 2 is negative 7. So 2 and negative 7 end up being our answer. Remember, quadratic formula works on every kind of quadratic equation that you possibly have. That's the one nice thing about it. Whereas factoring doesn't always work, completing the square doesn't always work, and certainly taking the square roots of both sides doesn't always work. So like when you get ones like 17 here, you don't have to go dividing by 2 like we did for completing the square, because the quadratic formula works for any quadratic. So our A is a 2, our B is a negative 7, and our C is a 5. So when I plug those in, you want to be careful with that negative B value. Because you're going to end up with negative 7. So that makes it positive 49 minus 40, so that makes that a 9 over 4. So again, square root of 9 is 3. So 7 plus 3 is 10 divided by 4. Makes that 5/2. 7 minus 3 is 4 divided by 4 makes that a 1. So 5/2 and 1. All right, 3 more. Again, still practicing that quadratic formula. So for 18, we got A of a 6, B of a 5, C of a negative 4. So that's going to be negative 5 plus or minus square root of 5 squared minus 4 times 6 times negative 4 all over 2 times 6. So let's see here. 5 squared minus 4 times 6 times negative 4 gives us a 121, which is 11. Square root of 121 is 11. So negative 5 plus 11 is 6. Divided by 12 and reduced makes it 1/2. Negative 5 minus 11 is negative 16. Over 12 gives us negative 4/3. So 1/2 and negative 4/3 for that one. All right. 19, almost done. ABC 145. So plugging it in, negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times 5 all over 2 times 1. Negative 4 plus or minus square root. Okay. So that's going to be 16 minus 20. That's going to be negative 4. We're going to get an I in this one. So we have the square root of negative 4, which would be 2I. So, rewrite it over here. Might make it a little easier for you to see what I'm going to do. We can reduce these. We can actually divide 4 by 2 and we can divide 2 by 2. So we're just going to reduce. We get negative 2 plus or minus I. That's our final answer for that one. And then last one for 20, ABC. A is a 1, B is a 3, C is a 3. So plugging it in, negative 3 plus or minus square root. Negative 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times 3 all over 2 times 1. So that's going to be 9 minus 12, so that's going to be negative 3 over 2. So we're just going to have negative 3 plus or minus I, radical 3. You got to take that negative out all over 2. And there's nothing to reduce. So that's going to be our final answer. So those were our types of factoring. Graphing, factoring, square roots, completing the square, and quadratic formula. So make sure you staple those all together and then glue this into your math notebook.